This Roman emperor renamed the city of Rome itself after his own name. He renamed the months of the calendar year after his own titles. And he compelled the Roman Senate, the same body that had governed the Republic for centuries, to formally declare him a living god. He didn't stop at declarations. He personally fought in the arena as a gladiator, a profession Roman citizens considered fit only for slaves and criminals, dressed as the demigod Hercules, whom he genuinely believed himself to be a living reincarnation of. His name was Commodus. His father was one of the most respected rulers in Roman history. And this is the true story of how the son of Rome's philosopher-emperor became one of its most dangerous, and how his own inner circle finally decided he had to be stopped. To understand how strange Commodus really was, you first need to understand exactly what he inherited. His father was Marcus Aurelius, the last of the so-called 5 good emperors, a philosopher-king who spent his evenings, even in military camps on distant frontiers, writing private reflections on duty, discipline, and mortality. Those notes survive today as the Meditations, a book still read, studied, and quoted nearly 2,000 years later by people who have never studied Roman history at all. For generations before Marcus Aurelius, a run of Roman emperors had followed a deliberate, almost unusual practice for a hereditary monarchy. Rather than automatically handing power to a biological son, each emperor formally adopted the most capable available successor he could find in the empire, regardless of blood relation, and groomed that person specifically for the job over years. That practice had produced a remarkable, decades-long run of competent, relatively stable rulers, a stretch of Roman history later writers would look back on as something close to a golden age. Commodus broke that entire system, not through any scheme or plot, but simply by existing as Marcus Aurelius's actual biological son at exactly the wrong historical moment. He was made co-emperor alongside his father in 177 CE, while still a teenager, sharing the title and the responsibility, at least in name, while his father remained the dominant figure. He became sole emperor in 180 CE, at just 18 or 19 years old, when Marcus Aurelius died in camp, still personally leading a difficult, grinding military campaign against Germanic tribes along the Danube frontier. The contemporary Roman senator and historian Cassius Dio, who lived through what followed, later described this transition in a single, famous line. Rome had fallen from a kingdom of gold to one of iron and rust. Commodus's very first major decision as sole emperor set the tone for everything that followed. His father had spent years and enormous resources fighting a difficult, grinding war against several Germanic tribes along the Danube frontier, trying to secure that border for the long term rather than simply pushing the problem down the road for the next emperor to deal with. Commodus abandoned that campaign almost immediately after his father's death, negotiating a peace with the very tribes his father had spent years fighting, largely on terms favorable to them, so that he could return to the comforts and entertainments of Rome instead of continuing to live in a military camp on a cold, contested frontier. To some, this looked like practical, even reasonable, diplomacy. To many in the Roman elite, it looked like a young man abandoning his father's unfinished work the moment he was no longer around to enforce it. Back in Rome, Commodus increasingly indulged in the luxuries and entertainments the capital offered, in sharp contrast to his father's austere, disciplined reputation. It didn't take long for that contrast to produce real enemies, some of them disturbingly close to home. In 182 CE, a conspiracy formed to assassinate him from inside his own family. It was led in part by his own sister, Lucilla, who had once held a position of real prominence at court and deeply resented seeing her status reduced once her brother, rather than her late husband, became the dominant figure in Roman politics. The assassination attempt failed, but it appears to have permanently changed something in Commodus. In the years that followed, he grew visibly more paranoid and more willing to have suspected rivals, including a growing number of Roman senators, executed on comparatively thin evidence. Rather than governing directly himself, Commodus increasingly handed the actual daily work of running the empire to a series of powerful favorites and prefects. These men would rise to enormous personal influence and wealth, effectively run the government in Commodus's name for a period of years at a time, making real decisions about taxation, provinces, and the military, and then, almost without exception, eventually be blamed publicly for the empire's problems and executed themselves the moment they became unpopular or simply inconvenient to keep around any longer. It was a pattern that let Commodus enjoy the power of the throne while distancing himself from the responsibility of actually using it well. And while his favorites managed the empire, Commodus was developing an obsession that would come to define his entire public image. He became fixated on the mythological demigod Hercules, son of the god Jupiter, famous across the entire Roman world for his superhuman strength and his legendary labors, stories every Roman citizen would have grown up hearing repeated in one form or another. Commodus didn't simply admire Hercules the way another Roman citizen might. He came to genuinely, publicly believe that he himself was Hercules, reincarnated directly into his own body, son of Jupiter in every meaningful sense. According to the ancient historian Herodian, Commodus formally ordered that he no longer be addressed as Commodus, son of Marcus. He was to be called Hercules, son of Zeus. Surviving Roman coins minted during his reign back this up independently of any single hostile chronicler. They show Commodus's own face paired directly with Hercules's traditional lion skin headdress and heavy club, official state currency, handled every day by ordinary people, quietly reinforcing his claimed identity across the entire empire. The renaming didn't stop with himself. Commodus renamed the city of Rome itself, Colonia, Lucia, Annia, Commodiana, effectively the colony of Commodus, and decreed that Roman citizens should now be called Commodiani. He renamed the months of the calendar year as well, stripping out their traditional names entirely and replacing them with a string of his own official titles, one after another, so that the entire empire's calendar, the thing every single person in Rome would consult every single day of their lives, effectively became a running monument to himself. And the Roman Senate, the very body that had once governed the Republic itself and still carried enormous symbolic weight even under imperial rule, was compelled, whatever its members may have privately thought, to formally declare Commodus a living god. Then Commodus took his Hercules identity somewhere no previous emperor had dared, directly into the arena as a performer. He personally fought as a gladiator in front of enormous crowds and staged elaborate, carefully choreographed hunts where he killed lions, ostriches, leopards, and elephants, often dressed as Hercules, complete with the lion skin cloak and heavy wooden club in front of thousands of watching Roman citizens who had never expected to see their own emperor in the sand of the arena. Ancient sources claim he did this in well over 700 separate contests over the course of his reign. Modern historians think that specific number is likely exaggerated for dramatic effect, but his arena appearances themselves and the enormous public spectacle they created are independently well documented across multiple sources. For a Roman emperor to appear as a gladiator at all was considered deeply, almost unforgivably scandalous by the Roman elite. Gladiators were typically slaves, condemned criminals, or desperate volunteers with nothing left to lose, occupying a position near the very bottom of Roman social status, legally and socially about as far removed from an emperor as a Roman citizen could imagine. Each one of these elaborate performances was also extremely expensive, and Commodus staged them again and again, straining the imperial treasury alongside his broader personal extravagance. By the final years of his reign, Rome's finances were under real, visible strain, forcing debased coinage and unpopular new taxes, a direct and traceable consequence of the way its own emperor had chosen to spend both his money and his attention for over a decade. Commodus had already narrowly survived one assassination attempt years earlier. He would not survive a second one. On the last day of the year, 192 CE, a conspiracy formed inside his own innermost circle. His mistress, Marcia, his chamberlain Eclectus, and Quintus Aemilius Latus, the commander of his own Praetorian Guard. According to the story that survives, they had discovered a list, apparently in Commodus's own handwriting, naming all three of them among the people he intended to have executed next, alongside several other prominent figures at court. They struck first, before he could act on his own list. An initial attempt to poison his food failed to kill him quickly enough, so the conspirators brought in a professional wrestler named Narcissus, who strangled Commodus to death in his own private bath. His death ended the Nerva Antonine dynasty, the very same line of adopted, carefully chosen rulers his father had once represented at its absolute best, and plunged Rome into a brutal civil war known afterward as the Year of the Five Emperors, as multiple rival claimants fought for the throne in rapid succession. That chaos was eventually resolved by Septimius Severus, who emerged victorious and founded the Severan dynasty that followed. So what does the story of Commodus actually reveal, beyond one man's descent into extravagance and cruelty? For generations, Rome had been governed by a run of emperors chosen specifically for their demonstrated competence, adopted into power precisely because they had earned it through years of proven ability, not because of an accident of birth. Commodus inherited the throne purely because of who his father happened to be, with none of that same vetting or preparation behind him, and the empire he inherited paid a real, measurable price for that difference for years afterward, long after his own death. It's worth remembering Commodus the next time you see a system quietly swap who is most capable for who is next in line by birthright, connection, or convenience alone, without anyone stopping to ask whether that swap is actually safe. The empire his father left behind was strong, well-funded, and stable enough to survive one deeply unqualified ruler at its head. It's worth asking, of Rome or of any system built the same way, how many such rulers in a row it would actually take before that inherited strength finally runs out completely?